Hello, everybody, and welcome to your Ruby Live event. My name is Eric Wynkoop, and I'm the Director of Culinary Instruction here at Ruby. I'm also one of your chef instructors in the courses, along with our other chef instructor teammates here. We've got another 4 members on the team, and so a pretty lean and mean crew here. But yeah, anyway, today it's my office hours. And I welcome you all specifically to this event with me today. And this is your chance to ask questions about food and cooking. And it's my chance to do my best to respond to those questions. Do note that if you have questions outside of this time period, you're always welcome to write in. If they are questions that are, let's say, more specific to your situation, maybe a little more personal in nature in terms of the cooking, right? Please write to us at support@ruby.com. And as always, we have a Q&A function on each task page as you move through your course. And if you have a question that pertains to the information on that task page and a question that is more public in nature, one that would benefit, other students as well, please use that function at the bottom of the task page. All right. Otherwise, let's go ahead and jump into today's questions and let's see where it takes us. All right. And oh, yeah, one other thing I want to mention as we get started is if you look on the right-hand side of your page, there are a number of questions already preloaded. And at the very top of that list, you see a link. It's ruby.com/search. And you can type in topics and do a little bit of searching as well on your own if you'd like. So just an additional feature for you. All right. So here we go. First up, this is from Heather, who says, I teach cooking classes in my community. If I were to demonstrate a recipe from Ruby Library, am I allowed to distribute the recipes to class attendees? Yes, please do. As always, in situations like this, we ask that you give credit where credit is due. And if you can include the ruby.com name on the recipe, that would be very much appreciated. But otherwise, I think it's a great thing to share the good word regarding better cooking, regardless of the style of cooking it is. All right, thank you. And next up from Cecilia. Many years ago, my brother said his favorite pastry was a traditional fruit tart. Can that be duplicated in an FOK method? The quick answer is yes. The more sort of detailed, answer I think might need to come from a discussion as we look at the particular recipe that you have in question. The FOK method also is variable, right, depending on the individual who is giving it a try or embracing it. And so, on one hand, we've got many folks that go all in terms of no oil and no salt and eliminating added sugar. And then we've got, many students that will find a happy place somewhere on this spectrum of, full on oil, salt, and sugar to no added oil, salt, and sugar. And so, it depends, right? When it comes to baking, I will say, generally speaking, that to eliminate oil, salt, and sugar can be difficult. There should be some workarounds for each of those key ingredients that function in very complex ways, not only on their own, but in conjunction with each other. Okay. So, when we think about taste and flavor enhancement and texture and other features that are affected by those 3 ingredients, we need to think about how we might replace those, because it's not going to be as simple as just omitting them, of course. Okay. And so if you want to do some experimenting, feel free to reach out initially at support@rouxbe.com. And, we can take a look at some ideas and send you back to your kitchen for experimenting. Also keep in mind, and this is for anybody that plans to make any substitution to a recipe, when we do that, we should expect the results to be different, right? That's reasonable. And certainly, if we make bigger changes, such as the elimination or the substitution of key ingredients, the end result will be different. And so, the other part of this discussion or this equation is that while the cook or the baker can do their best to come up with something that mimics the original, it's also going to be up to the consumer to change their mindset, to allow themselves to enjoy something new and different. Okay. I'm of the belief that, by and large, things that come at us in life and the way we deal with them are 90% mental. And certainly when it comes to the foods that we like and dislike, and I'm not talking about food allergies and these sort of biological and physiological issues, but when it comes to changes to our diet, those are 90% mental issues. And very often when something has changed, we don't like it. It's different. It doesn't take us back to our childhood memories anymore. There's a disconnect. There's a new path. But if we just settle down and look forward rather than backward, it helps. Also, look at what the food provides us rather than what it doesn't give us. Okay, that mindset is huge. Okay, and that's all on the consumer. And so anyway, those are things that come to mind as we talk about recipe substitutions and changing something, especially a favorite pastry. Okay, and also keep in mind that unless there's a pressing uh, let's say medical, reason or some other, very important cultural reason to stay to a certain path or another. When it comes to one's favorite pastry, maybe a person can also just enjoy that once in a while as is, as that occasional treat. As they make other changes in their life. But anyway, getting back on track with the questions at hand here, I'll wrap up my response to the to Cecilia's question at this point here. But do reach out to us, Cecilia, if you want to investigate that in more detail. Okay, support@rouxbe.com. All right, next up from Kathy. How do you cook eggplant without deep frying it so that you maintain its pretty purple color? Every time I stir fry it, it tastes great, but looks ugly. It's all brown and gray. Yes, those colors oxidize pretty quickly when exposed to heat. And the one method that I'm acquainted with that I'll use once in a while is one where the eggplant or eggplant pieces are soaked in an acidic solution, and so vinegar and water is what I use, and about a tablespoon of vinegar to a cup of water, that ratio. So if you need to double or triple it, just follow that ratio, and soaking the eggplant for just a minute or two is typically enough to maintain color, and then I will steam the eggplant. Okay, and hope you'll give that a try and see how the results are for you. Thank you. And next up from Myra, who says, can you recommend the best cookware to use for no oil cooking? Stainless, nonstick, cast iron, or does the cookware matter? Okay, so this could be a big answer here to your big question. On one hand, the cookware for the most part, doesn't matter. In other words, you can learn to use different types of cookware, for the type of cooking that you do. Um, on the other hand, there are some items that are really difficult to cook without oil or without a nonstick pan. Okay, and so eggs are an example. Also, very starchy items like. Well, we can work around this, but I was going to say russet potatoes, but we have a workaround for this. Okay, but eggs, I think, are a pretty good example of an item that can be pretty challenging to cook without oil or a stainless steel pan. But otherwise, other things, you can for the most part learn to manage your cookware with. Okay. Let me just, I'm going to mention a few things here in no particular order, okay? Regarding the type of cookware that you use. You mentioned non-stick. Um, in my opinion, if you're going to cook things that are very sticky, and eggs are that example I'll go to, I recommend having a stainless steel pan on hand. Okay, and just pick your size, whether it's a 5 inch, a 6 inch, or 7 inch, depending on the amount of cooking that you do at a given time. Okay, not that you have to use it every day or all the time, but they are just very handy when it comes to these finicky foods. Okay, or just use oil for those particular finicky foods, your choice. Now, the other thing I want to mention regarding non-stick cookware is consider buying a pan at a time. I don't recommend buying a full set, at least not with the non-stick pans that I've seen and used, okay? Because over time, they will accumulate scratches, and I call them micro scratches because initially you might be gently caring for them, but there's still scratches that accumulate until you can see them, and then eventually food starts to stick, and you'll need to replace the pan. Sometimes it happens over the course of just a year. Sometimes it's a few years, just depending on how much cooking you do and how you care for the pan. And because of this, I consider nonstick pans to be disposable items. And so, consider cast iron, copper, stainless steel, something else as your main set or go-to, cookware, but with, or maybe two pans, in your collection there that are nonstick. Okay. Yeah, I mean, otherwise, when it comes to cooking in the let's say non-stick or stainless steel cookware with no oil, follow our lessons. That'll walk you through this process of using water or some other liquid. And sometimes just the steam of cooking in the pan will do this, but the water will loosen up items that are stuck to the pan. Okay, so it's going to take some time, some patience on your part, because typically foods will initially stick. Okay, but through this process of adding moisture, you can get them to release. Okay, and of course, there's just a lot more practice that's going to be necessary on your part as well. Okay, I hope that is helpful as a starting point. Thank you. Oh. Mm-hmm. Okie doke. All right. And then, yeah, so the next question I want to look to here says, I am planning a vacation for a month in September. Would I have enough time to finish the pastry arts quick breads course if I take a month off? The quick answer is yes. I'm sure it's possible. Yes, it is possible, but it's all dependent upon your pace of work. Okay, and that's the beauty, right, of our courses is that you've got a start date, you've got an end date, but what you do in between is really up to you. And so, I'll let you sort of figure that out on paper. How many tasks or units you need to do in the amount of time that you have. All right. Thank you. All right, next up, the question is, I've been struggling with the no oil vegetable roasting. I've tried both 450 and 475 degrees Fahrenheit and gotten the proper browning. I've used a sauce to coat, the lemon tahini sauce, and the result is always a little disappointing. Seems not done enough. Any suggestions? The quick answer I think would be that if you're looking for a little bit more flavor development from the tahini and those ingredients in that sauce, then push that sauce for a little more caramelization if you think that might be the answer. Okay. Or you might need a little more salt or flavoring in that sauce itself before you apply it to the carrots. Okay. So, um, approach this from those two different angles. Okay. If it's, um, a matter of more caramelization, you might consider applying the sauce more thinly so that once it does caramelize in the oven, you have more browning to sauce ratio. Okay, so in other words, if you put a thick layer of sauce and the top gets browned, you still have all this sauce in the middle that's not browned. So when you go to eat it, there'll be a dilution of flavor, comparatively speaking. Okay, but otherwise, go back to the recipe for the sauce and then look at those ingredients. So whether it's the acid or um, the salt, maybe you want to add spices in order to bring up the flavor interest of the sauce itself. Okay, but do some experimentation. And again, if you have additional questions, reach out to us. All right, support@rouxbe.com. All right, next up, let's see. Jackie says, when a recipe calls for a specific amount of chopped herbs, such as thyme, cilantro, parsley, etc., do you chop the herbs first and then measure, or measure first? Yeah, hopefully the recipe is written in a way where it'll give you a hint. For example, if it says a cup of chopped parsley, then I would read that as chop the parsley first and then measure your cup. Okay. And generally speaking, I would say that you're going to chop first. But keep in mind that when it comes to flavorings like fresh herbs, if a measurement is given, like a cup, there's always a plus or minus, okay, of that measurement. It's never a hard measurement, and it shouldn't be, right? How much you chop the herbs will affect how much goes into the cup. How much you compress that herb into the cup will affect the density, and then your own palate preference, right, will affect how much of the herb you want to add to the dish. So start out, right, as a loose starting point with chopping your herbs and then going along with the recipe measurement. Make that recipe, see how you like the results, understand the recipe at that level, and then do it again. And this is where repetition and experience is so important to your understanding and confidence in the kitchen. Okay. At Rouxbe, what we say is that a recipe is merely a suggestion. And, we certainly have a lot of recipes and give you a lot of recipes, but they're for practice of the cooking methods and ancillary techniques that we emphasize in our courses. Okay. If you were to give, a recipe to 10 different cooks, there's a pretty good chance you're going to get 10 different versions of that item. And that's the way it is. Okay. Based upon a person's experience, based upon their tools, their equipment, the quality of their ingredients, and other factors, the results will differ. So it's going to be, up to you to prepare a dish more than once, and then understand it, and then make changes to suit your situation. Okay. When I may, I'll use me as an example, but I've heard this from other students as well. When I make a recipe for the first time and I am not so keen on the results, I've first thing I think is that, oh, hey, okay, um, maybe the way the author intended this doesn't quite match with my palate, so I need to make it again to tweak the results. What I hear from students sometimes is, oh, this is a lousy recipe. It's poorly written. The dish didn't taste good. Okay. Whereas what we need to do is we have to come back to the cutting board and prepare it again and make adjustments and make it our own. Okay. That's the process of cooking. While I agree there are some poorly written recipes out there, usually it's going to be a situation where the cook needs to do it a few times to figure it out. Okay. And so hopefully that gives you some perspective and the inclination to experiment and keep honing your skills. All right. Thank you. And we got another question from Jackie, who says, how long does fresh garlic last? Are they supposed to start sprouting green? Is it best to leave out or refrigerate? So this is going to be a general food storage question. um, when it comes to things like garlic or onions or other things that have a tendency to sprout, if they do get to the point of sprouting, that usually tells us that we need to use it faster or buy less of it so that we can use it up faster. Okay. Another thing to consider is the storage place. This could be an indicator that we should store this in a cooler environment. So that it's not, starting to give off this new next generation of foliage. Okay. Um, so, how long does garlic last? Any food's shelf life will vary depending on your storage conditions. And the warmer the conditions are, the more humid they are, the quicker a produce item is going to sprout or decay. Okay. And so, garlic can last a long time in a cool-ish, dry-ish climate, and a relatively short time in a hot and moist climate. So it's difficult to give you just one answer. But instead, I would suggest that you think about your own environment and then just make some changes according to our discussion right here. Okay. Um, and then is it best to leave it out or refrigerate? If your surroundings, your environment is hot, all the time or pretty hot during a long, summer season, then consider refrigerating some of these things that are perishable. And it's not just fresh produce. This would hold true for nuts and seeds as well, and also whole grains and whole grain flours, all of which have a relatively high fat content, compared to refined foods, and therefore they have a chance of spoiling, going rancid, or oxidizing sooner than later. And so a cooler environment is going to be a better choice for storage. It doesn't have to be in the refrigerator or the freezer. If you have a cool place, in a basement or under the stairs someplace, that would be suitable as well. But it's going to be up to you sort of to make that judgment. Okay. But just keep in mind that all food items do have a shelf life, and it's going to be up to us to purchase appropriate quantities that allow us to move through it before it turns that corner. Okay, thank you. And next question, do you recommend using an air fryer? I'll leave that up to you ultimately, but an air fryer is just another appliance, and it can be a convenient appliance if that's how your lifestyle is situated. Okay, it's it does a lot of things. It acts as an oven, it acts as a saute pan. These sort of dry heat cooking methods can be performed in an air fryer. So you figure it out. They're not a bad thing, but on the other hand, I don't use one. So I think the possibilities lie somewhere in between there, and just give it a try. All right, and see how you like it. Thank you. And the next question from Terry, is jarred sauerkraut or kimchi as healthy and beneficial as what is fresh and refrigerated in the grocery store? Um, I'm not sure necessarily what the difference is. I get jarred kimchi from the grocery store, and but to answer your question, maybe more specifically, uh, I'm guessing that it would be, but I certainly can't guarantee that. I think you need to look at how the product is packaged. These items are alive, and should be packed accordingly. So inquire about how they've been treated before they left the processing facility. If they've been, um, um, I don't know, pasteurized or treated in some fashion that might kill off the live microbes that you otherwise would want, right, in that sauerkraut or that kimchi. Okay, but I mean, otherwise, the comparison here is pretty broad, and I think all of these things could be good products. If you're questioning it, then please inquire, okay, with the manufacturer of the product. Thank you. All right, and the next question is from Suneti. This question is about task 62, the no oil sauteing activity in the FOK course. The recipe uses mushrooms, which my family and I can't stand the smell of. Is there anything I can substitute them with for full marks? Yes, this is a generally right practice for no oil cooking. So, other hard items, I recommend root vegetables generally. So, carrots, maybe a large dice of carrot, would be fine. Other root vegetables are fine, as I mentioned, but at this point anyway, avoid potatoes because of the relatively high starch content that can stick to the pan and could be a little bit fussy. So, choose carrots or, maybe it's parsnips or something else. But yes, I think some of those things will get you through this assignment just fine. Thank you. And next up, the question from Fred is, for cooking with less oil, can we still use stainless steel pots or are we forced to use Teflon pans? And so, this question is, in line with the previous questions that we've had here where you bet if you are cutting back on oil but using a little bit, then your options are very broad. You can use, any sort of cookware that comes to mind. And it's going to be a matter of figuring out how to heat the pan, okay? And it might be a combination of a little bit of oil, maybe a little bit of liquid to loosen up things on the pan if they do happen to get a little finicky on you. Now, if you're going to go to a no oil, no added oil sort of cooking, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, it'll, some things get a little bit difficult to do, okay? In which case you might consider bending the rules a little bit by either using a little bit of oil for certain things or maybe having that one nonstick pan in your collection. Now, when it comes to nonstick pans, certainly Teflon, that company is still around today, but received some negative feedback in past decades, and probably for good reason. As far as technology goes today, I don't know exactly how it stacks up against the technology of the 70s when that Teflon company and brand name was popularized. But you might do a little comparison to see if your confidence can be raised by knowing that today's technology is a little safer than it was in yesteryear. Another idea is to look at some of the other technologies that are available to us, whether it's a ceramic coated pan of some sort, or something else. Okay, that might get you down this path of no oil or low oil cooking with just one of these pans in your collection. But all the while keeping in mind, right, that it's probably going to be a disposable item, as I mentioned a few minutes ago. So be prepared to replace it every few years or so or as needed. Thank you. And another question from Suneti. How do you turn cooking and nutrition into something more than a hobby, like make it count for college? Okay, and this is from 12-year-old Suneti, one of our students And yeah, so I think the first thing you're asking is perhaps about credit in college. And I'll mention a couple of things. One is that, we do have some courses that qualify for college credit. And, if you want more information on that, some of that information is probably accessible on our website, or reach out to us at support@rouxbe.com. And, we can have a more direct conversation with you. Another option is to look at college majors that focus on this area of cooking and nutrition. And there are certainly many options out there. Um, and whether it's a major or a minor, or some other way of connecting cooking and nutrition to other disciplines of study. Okay, so there are certainly some options out there to do that. All right. And this can vary widely depending on the type of nutrition, meaning the perspective, the approach to nutrition that you want to take. All right, whether it's a Western, I'll say Western approach, um, many times, which is grounded in um, uh, uh, biology and microbiology, and these areas of study. There is the Ayurvedic approach to nutrition, and Ayurveda has a very, very different theoretical foundation that its study is based on. And so that brings in a very different perspective and way to approach the diet and cooking and holistic health. And so those are just a couple of examples to consider. Thank you. And next question. What's the best way to sharpen our knives? I have a honing steel but needs something more. A whetstone, a commercial sharpener. Okay, so here's my preamble on the word best when it comes to the best of anything. There usually isn't a best of something that applies to everybody. We'll need to find a method that's going to be best for you specifically. And so let's talk about this a little bit. A honing steel is used for maintenance. And we should use it fundamentally on a daily basis. And for most people, most of the time, once a day is quite fine. But at some point, with continued use, your knife will become dull, and the steel will be ineffective. Okay, and we need to actually sharpen the blade and restore the cutting edge. And so this is where some sort of sharpening technology comes in. And on one hand, we have whetstones, and whetstones are fantastic. And arguably, among all the options out there, the whetstone or a combination of whetstones can provide the best results. But the learning curve on the whetstone takes a lot of practice to climb, and then also practice to maintain your skills. And for folks that will be doing that with some frequency, that might be a good way to go. Okay, there's it's time consuming, and it takes some setup and some cleanup, and certain tools and equipment are necessary. So it's a whole nother thing on its own. And I certainly recommend it if that's what you want to take on. But on the other hand, if you want a simpler solution, then this is where either a manual, right, or an electric sharpener that has these discs where you run your blade through them would come into play. And those can certainly sharpen a blade, and it's better than using a dull knife. But again, as I mentioned, the whetstone will provide the best results once you understand how to use a whetstone. But again, if you don't have the tolerance for that, then consider one of these other technologies, which can give you results that will yield a knife that is quite functional on a daily basis. At which point you would go back to the steel, right, for daily maintenance. Okay. So it's going to be up to you, Claire, to kind of think about and maybe even try out, these different methods to determine what is best for you. Okay. Thank you. All right. And then Terry says, is it okay legally to include success stories from FOK websites in an inspirational book I'm writing? Uh-huh. Yeah, this is a fair question to ask, and I think one that should be directed to the Forks Over Knives organization. Okay, they're actually a separate team, a separate organization from us. They're a partner of ours, so we do a lot of stuff together in terms of our course. But when it comes to questions like this, I would direct it to their directors, their legal team, to get their response. Okay. And if you go to their website and scroll to the bottom of the page, you can find some contact information. Thank you. All right. Next up, what's the best method to treat your wood chopping board? How often to treat it? Let's see. So, generally speaking, folks will recommend treating a wood cutting board with some, um, mineral oil periodically, and it just depends on how often you use it and how damaged the surface gets. Okay. The other part of maintaining a cutting board is the daily maintenance of letting it air dry, um, and even putting it out in the sun every once in a while to get that sort of exposure as well. We all benefit from exposure to the sun. And so does your wood cutting board from time to time anyway. And also, if your cutting board surface gets damaged, then it might require some sanding to refinish the surface. Okay, so there are some different approaches, some different things to consider depending on the situation. Okay, and yeah, happy cooking to you. Thank you. All right, next question. How long should you keep spices? I love this question because I love spices. And I'll tell you something, when you go to a place where spices are produced, and India, is one example, you will learn that spices are a seasonal food. And, if you live, in such a region or within, access, you can be anywhere, I suppose, but just let's say you have access to spices in their sort of seasonal rotation, then you know how the flavor is wonderful. You get these subtle notes and more complex notes. Floral notes and fruity notes tend to expire quickest. Those tend to be the most volatile, it seems, within these aroma compounds. And there's a big difference. And so, the first thing I say is that spices are seasonal. So if you can move through your inventory on an annual basis and refresh them from a source that has high turnover of their inventory, so you can get the freshest product that you can get your hands on, that's the best situation. Okay. Otherwise, try to use them up within a couple, 3 years. Spices, like a lot of dry foods, they will slowly degrade or decline over time. And, spices, um, at least in my experience, don't go rancid, like things like nuts and seeds will, but they will gradually transform and dull in flavor as things shift and as things those volatile compounds dissipate, and so the flavor fades, right? So they're certainly edible, 5, 6, sometimes 10 years from now, but they're just not as good. Okay. So, keep that in mind. Try to use them up as quick as you can. And this is where I say add spices to everything, morning, noon, and night. For two reasons. One, because it makes your food taste good. And number two, because spices are good for you. They contain so many phenolic compounds and these phytonutrients that are really good for us. And don't wait to read about the beneficial effects of spices because in the Western scientific community, anyway, the knowledge isn't there yet. You'll be waiting years and probably decades before folks do enough research on all the benefits of all the spices to fully or maybe better understand what we have going. Instead, just enjoy spices, knowing that your food will taste better and you will benefit from all of that plant-based goodness. Okay, um, enjoy. Next up, oh look, another question from Jackie, who says, "Can you recommend some good knives to use for chopping vegetables?" Um, this is another one of those questions where it really depends on you and your budget and sort of your comfort, with your arm strength and other factors. But in other words, you can really uh, buy, in terms of price point, knives that run the spectrum, right? From comparatively affordable, I think, for a lot of people, to these handmade, bespoke cutlery items that can be several $100s per knife or more. And but I will say that one place to start, okay, in terms of consideration is the Victorinox company, which is the company that makes the Swiss Army knives. And they have some cutlery in different lines that they make, but one is called Fibrox, Fibrox. And that particular line I find to be a good value. Okay. There's nothing fancy about them. Okay. The blades are made of stamped steel and the handles are made from molded rubber. All right. I still use these on many occasions. And, my professional friends will sometimes jeer me and poke me and make fun of me because I have these cheapo knives that I use. And I've got other knives too, but if I'm doing some catering or something and then clunking around with stuff, I'm probably not going to use my best knives. But anyway, the point is that they provide, in my opinion, a good value. Okay. They are hard enough, the knives, the blade that is, that they'll maintain a cutting edge for a reasonably long period of time. And the metal is soft enough that they're pretty easy to sharpen. So in terms of maintenance, they're pretty easy, and they're affordable. And also, several years ago, Consumer Reports rated them as a best buy, which I thought was pretty cool. And anyway, that's going to be a starting point, in my opinion. But there are other fine knives to use as well. Okay, thank you. All right. And let's see the next question here, um, also from Jackie, is what are some tips on how not to waste food? For example, buying a bunch of cilantro, but only using a few tablespoons. Also, fresh veggies seem to not last long. So, when it comes to food waste, um, I'm going to make a suggestion, and then I'll get back to answering your question here. Go to the James Beard Foundation website, and I believe that you'll still be able to access a food waste education course called Waste Not, and check that out. Okay. Um, but otherwise, uh, reducing food waste starts with purchasing. And we need to start to purchase smaller quantities of food so that we can use them in time before they're not usable for whatever reason. Okay. And this is true whether you're in a professional setting or whether you're at home. Okay. The same challenges exist and the same answers basically will exist. Okay. The other part of this is if we're talking about, something like fresh herbs, my answer, like the use of spices, is start adding it to all your food, okay? And start enjoying the freshness of herbs, in many more dishes than maybe you currently do or have been doing. It's going to be really up to us to start to expand, right, our repertoire of cooking and also our enjoyment of food. And the way to do that is to start using these ingredients, and especially these more highly perishable items, in more dishes more frequently. Okay. Also, think about your freezer, okay, as a place to hold foods to extend their shelf life, okay, and understand that a freezer should be used as a temporary measure. It's not a one-way journey, which I often see, right? We'll sock away something in the freezer. It sits in there for months or sometimes years until it's frostbitten and cannot be used at all. And then the answer is simple: we throw it away. And to avoid that, uh, label and date your food that will go into the freezer so you know how long it's been in there, and then try to use it up within just let's say a month or two, maybe 3 months, depending on what it is. So you have to be conscious of what you have in the freezer and make an effort to cycle them out as well as cycle them in. Okay. And then also consider food preservation techniques, that might use uh, salt or vinegar or other fermentation techniques in order to transform a food item and extend its shelf life. Okay, and so those are a few basic things to consider, and it really requires for some cooks these significant shifts, right, in the way that we operate in our kitchen. Maybe the way that we eat, the things that we eat. And I guess the other thing that comes to mind is to just give away food. If you have some extras, they still have some shelf life remaining, but you're not going to get to them. Give them to your neighbor, give them to a family member, and let them enjoy them while the food still has value. Okay, thank you. All right. And the next one, and this is from Jackie, who says, "How long do fresh onions last? Should I leave them out on the counter or refrigerate them?" Yeah, this is very much like the garlic question or produce questions in general. Okay, fresh onions can last sometimes just a matter of days in a hot, humid environment, or months if it's going to be a cool and dry environment. And so you think about where you live, how the inside of your home or your kitchen or your pantry is, and then make the decision on whether that needs to go, whether it's an onion or something else, whether that needs to go in the fridge or it can sit out for a little bit longer. If I'm going to get to it in 2 or 3 days or in another couple of weeks, and then move forward from there. Making adjustments along the way, right? Life is all about adjustments and developing best practices for our own situation. And certainly cooking and food handling is no different. Okay. And so experiment, take notes. I take notes. I always recommend that my students take notes so that you can compare results and fine tune your process for your own situation. Thank you. All right, next up from Toki, who says, looking for some vegan travel hacks or tips to stay compliant while on vacation. I will have a fridge and microwave in my hotel room, considering checking my luggage to bring my NutriBullet. Okay, so you got a blender, a refrigerator, and a microwave oven. Um, let's see here. Yeah, I get these Weird Al Yankovic songs stuck in my head when I see certain words. But think about what you eat right now. And, you know, if you use a microwave right now, then it should be a pretty smooth transition to, cooking some simple things or to heat foods, with that particular technology. The other things, refrigerator and the blender, you're using those now. I know that, and so that's not going to pose any change at all. So the thing is just going to be on for you to think about how you cook your food, what cooking methods you use. So you can do potatoes, you can do a lot of things, right, in a microwave oven. Some of that will just depend upon um, the sophistication of the oven, perhaps, or maybe it just takes more hands-on effort to rotate foods and make sure that they heat and cook evenly. Um, a microwave oven is not going to get you browning, right? Unless it's a particular type of microwave oven that's a combi oven with, a dry heat function. But I don't see necessarily that you would face a whole lot of differences. Okay, you're looking at moist heat cooking. Um, so again, browning on the food is not going to be probably possible. Again, unless you've got a certain kind of microwave. But no, I like these situations, whether I'm camping in a hotel room um, or something else. Just do it. And being in a different location or with different things um, isn't a big deal in my mind. Again, it's probably 90% mental, as I mentioned earlier in today's program. So go forth and just try to create these things that you normally do, but in this moist heat environment. It might take you a little bit longer or take a little bit more engagement on your part, but you can do it. Thank you. All right. And the last question, this one is from Barbara, who says, I freeze flowers. Okay. I freeze flowers and where are we here? And okay, nuts and seeds. Do they need to be brought to room temperature before using in recipes? Um, so I guess it depends on what you're making. If you're, let's say, making pancake batter, then probably not, because pancakes are pretty thin, and once you put it into the pan or on your griddle, they're going to heat up pretty quickly. Okay. Now, when you're baking, okay, there is an optimum temperature for the dough, right? Once the dry components and the liquid components come together and you move into the fermentation stages of baking yeast breads, okay? Where, very often we will heat the liquid in order to bring up the temperature of the cooler flour, to some midpoint that's going to be ideal for um, uh, yeast multiplication and therefore the fermentation of the dough. Um, outside of that, I think we need to look at specific examples of what you might have in mind. So some cases yes, some cases no. It just doesn't make any difference. All right, thank you. Okie doke. And next up from Christine, I say two more questions here. My question about roasting vegetables without oil was more about the final texture of the roasted vegetables. I continually end up with a vegetable that lacks the lovely oil roasted texture and mouthfeel. Is that normal? Yeah, you bet. Uh, I think you hit this nail right on the head in the wording of your question. Where you are comparing the lovely oil roasted texture and mouthfeel as we compare the results with a no oil roasted product. And so this is where we need to shift our expectations for the finished product. Okay. Um, Oil and that medium of heat transfer, it does special things to food, right? Whether it's sautéing or roasting or deep frying, the flavor and texture cannot be beat. I mean, it's unique, right? And so it's difficult or impossible to replicate in its absence. And so this is going to be one of those situations where we need to just shift up here and then focus down here on the food in a different way, and then find what the food gives us rather than what it lacks. And you'll enjoy it. I'm sure you will, right? But let's go forth with that method. All right. Thank you. All right. And then last and certainly not least, from Trudy, who says, what do you recommend as a simple way to monitor contents of the freezer? Also, pantry items. I tend to use the same items and forget some special items. Yes, yeah, this is a good question, and I think that's something that I bump into on an ongoing basis. And the first thing is to label and date items. And there's some things that are self-explanatory, upon just looking at them. Maybe you can just date them, right? But if something is going to be wrapped up or in a container that becomes frosty or otherwise you can't see the contents of, then labeling it is very helpful, as well as the dating. Now, regarding the freezer, and I guess, and the dry storage, the pantry as well, the organization is going to be a place to start. Okay, where you have maybe small things, or in this case, specialty items that you might put in a particular location. Where you know that there are these small quantity or specialty items located, so you can just check on that periodically to see what you want to use next or what needs to be used up pretty soon. And that's going to be true of the freezer as well. Okay. And then the other thing is to just revisit these spaces with some regularity, whether it's a once a week sort of a schedule, kind of get in the freezer and dig down or dig deep into the freezer to refresh your memory on what it is that you have in there. And then, come up with those few things in that coming week where you can use those certain items that you have in the freezer or the pantry and earmark them. You pull them out for defrosting in the refrigerator, where the defrosting process might take a couple, 3 days, depending on what it is. And then after which time they're still going to be good in the refrigerator for another couple, 3, 4 days, depending on what it is or how they were handled prior to freezing, right? And so you could develop this sort of a rotation system that'll keep you on top of your inventory. Another way to do this is to come up with a list that you might, tape to your refrigerator door, where you can note certain things that you want to use up within the next, let's say, week or so. Okay, but if you don't want to have this sort of a list on your refrigerator door, then there are other ways that we talked about that you can manage your inventory. But then the other part of this is finding things to make, right, that'll utilize these items. Sometimes it's just a leftover item, and that's easy. Just thaw it, reheat it, and enjoy it. But if it's some specialized ingredients that you just use occasionally, then you have to go back to maybe that regional cuisine, or maybe you want to look at other regional cuisines from around the world that will utilize the same ingredient, so you can enjoy some different types of cuisine built around this one ingredient. Or it'll give you a chance to challenge yourself to explore some different parts of the world and to enjoy some different flavors at mealtime, again, built around this given ingredient that you have in your inventory. Okay, and so those are all things to consider, and in there lies the solution for you. All right, thank you so much. This brings us to the end of our program today. I look forward to seeing you again next time. And until we meet again, happy cooking. Thank you.